Welcome, and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. On the program today, we're going to be talking about something that by midlife many of us have experienced probably more than once, and that is relationships. That's right, sometimes we go out and we try to find that secret loved one that's going to stay with us for the rest of our lives. Perhaps it's a best friend that we want to bring in. Or maybe we're starting to build a business and we realize as we bring in people who are going to help support our dreams and goals of having a better life, that we need to have better relationships with people so that way we can find that dream come true. Our guest has spent the last 17 years or better coaching thousands of individuals, couples, and teams around embodying their relationship brilliant and has spent an estimated $100,000 under mentors and researchers like Guy and Catlin Hendricks and John Gottman. He's also known as the Embody Your Relationship Brilliance Man. He is the Relationship Reality Wizard, workshop leader, and author of more than of the book 100 Plus Ways to Get Back on the Horse. He's joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program today to talk with us about relationships. I'd like to welcome to our program Mr. Ed Ferrigan. Ed, thank you for joining us again here on the program.
Thank you, Dan.
Now, tell us how you started out with this work. I mean, you know, when it comes to relationships, there's a lot of work out there. There are a lot of books. There are a lot of coaches, gurus, you name it. It seems like a pretty saturated field, but obviously this holds some appeal for you.
Well, that's a good question, Dan. And just before I get launched in, I'd like people to, if they're online and they're listening, they can open up another browser tab.
Sure.
And go to facebook.com/Getting Relationship Right, and that's just Getting Relationship RIGHT. And I've made a little post there on the left side. It says, "Looking forward to my interview with Beyond 50 Radio." So make comments underneath the Dan's picture there. And then, you know, people can feel a little bit more engaged in our conversation, and I can address some of the questions or comments that come up to make sure this is, you know, kind of a mutual thing between us and our audience today. Because I want to make sure people get the most out of this. So circling back to your question, Dan, as you know, for the last 17 years, I've been on my own journey and healing journey, and it's been just tremendous. I went through many phases of coaching, different styles of coaching, different models of coaching. And back in 2004, I actually had an event that happened to me that triggered an early life trauma. And I went into post-traumatic stress. And I was just stunned at what was happening because I had put so much time into my own development. And it was unnerving because I had no idea what was happening to me. It wasn't like somebody, you know, left me for another man, or, you know, we were fighting or something like that. It was, you know, just suddenly my body just went into these really bad shakes and those kinds of things, and I was stunned. And as time went by, I went to a couple of people to do some work, and I learned about this process called somatic experiencing, which releases trauma from the body, which made me realize that in all the years I'd been coaching, there was this underlying issue that was showing up, and I knew it was there with other people. I just couldn't identify what it was that was there, and it was always moving people back into really bad habits, depression, sadness. You know, just, you know, people were not happy even with all the coaching that we do, and they would even do the homework. And I realized that this was a key that unlocked the door for me. And so I actually went into the program, got certified over the last 6-7 years in somatic experiencing, and have used it as my core process when I need it, of course, for everybody I work with. And it's just astounding. The results are just astounding. And so that brought me full circle. And so now I'm back, you know, really doing solely relationship coaching, a little bit of executive coaching, but primarily group relationship coaching with people.
Now, Ed, here's something, you know, as I listen to what you're describing there, you have to say to yourself, is there possibly too much to getting to know a processes when it comes to relationships? Shouldn't people just sort of naturally go about, let's say, their day and they discover a relationship with someone, follow its course, perhaps maybe it unfolds and doesn't work out the way they wanted it to. They kind of deal with perhaps the stress, the depression, the sadness of that lost relationship. They sort of grow and learn and heal. Perhaps they're better on the next one and realize more about what it is they want, and sort of take the next step. Or was all this, do you feel, really necessary, and does it seem encouraging to share with our audience that this is a direction they need to go?
Well, I think, humans are very unique in that there's a propensity to want to be resilient around things that happen to us.
Right.
But the problem is this. We've got this wiring. We've got, if you can imagine, 3 parts of our brain, and I'll use some metaphors, the lizard brain, which is all about survival and procreation. And then there's the mammalian brain, which is all about relationships. And then there's the dolphin brain, or the smart brain, that is really about decision-making and thoughts and rationalization and these kinds of things. Well, the problem is that early life, like fetal development, first year of life up to 5-6 years, our limbic brain, or our reptilian brain, and our mammalian brain are the most highly developed. And the problem is that there's a part of our nervous system, and this is really important. This was life-changing for me when I understood this. The nervous system is your regulator. It goes up and down according to the way we perceive the world in any given moment. So I can be really excited and my nervous system gets activated, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or I can see a grizzly come in my direction and I can get really activated and want to, the lizard brain kicks in and says, run, get out of there, or just hold still so it doesn't chase you. And so you're in this dilemma. But the issue is this. Babies, in our biology class when we were growing up, in our grade school and junior high, we were taught there was a sympathetic and a parasympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic is what causes activation, which is part of our safety system that says, hey, you got something going on here, pay attention. And then there's the sequence of events that happens afterwards. Well, the problem is with babies, they get activated like I'm hungry, or there's loud noises in the room and they start crying. Well, the way we develop the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the calming down, is through the interaction of the primary caretaker, which usually and ideally is the mother. That means if the mother is not catching the stress or knows what to do or is not very present with that child knows that something is not quite right, and it doesn't learn how to regulate their nervous system very well. We see this with vets that go in the Army when they go to war. The ones that had really good care, their nervous system defaults to a calming, almost like if you were to make the statement, life is going to be okay no matter what. But babies that had really healthy nervous systems, that's what their default is. They kind of default to, life's going to be okay. But these babies that didn't get that, their nervous systems are going bonkers, and they're doing everything they can to try to regulate that activation. And that's where the problem begins. So here's another hallmark of trauma. We end up attracting the very people in our lives that are similar to those early life imprints. And part of our nervous system wants to finish and complete those structures or those extreme parts of us that never got finished. And it's great if we learn from each relationship, circling back to your question and your comment. It's great if we learn from it, but that makes the assumption that we're open and we've got this perspective that life is always teaching us something, and there's an opportunity in any given moment to learn it. Mm-hmm. And it also assumes that if we're going to be healthy about this, it assumes that we have a belief that says everybody has their own perspective, and I don't have to take it personally. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. 'Cause what happens is we end up taking things personally, and we start into arguments, we start into fighting, we start into doing distancing techniques or strategies that are unconscious that create distance between us and our partner.
Mm.
And these are all embedded. Here's another really key piece that I want to share with folks today, is our nervous system. If you look at the brain, there's different stages of development. At around 18 months, there's part of the brain called the hippocampus that starts coming online. And what we're starting to see in neuroscience is the hippocampus is responsible for date stamping and time coding any event. So you probably have recognized over your lifetime that most people can't tell a lot of stories before age 5. And the reason for that is because that hippocampus wasn't developed enough yet. Now, that isn't 100% true, because there are some people that can remember certain things when they're little, and that's fine. But for the most part, the average person cannot remember much. But guess what? The body remembers it all. If it's a highly emotional charged experience, it's stored in the body somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what's happening when people hit 40. Midlife crisis is really about all these structures that we've been hanging on to are starting to fall apart. There's part of our psychology that doesn't want to keep hanging on to those particular strategies because they're tiring, they're exhausting. Mm-hmm. So we start acting out. We start, dating younger people, or buying motorcycles, or quitting our jobs and changing careers. All these things start happening, and then we wonder what's going on there. And really, what's happening is we're trying to hit the reset button so we can kind of clean the slate of all these past issues that have been bogging us down for so many years.
So should a person continue to live through these experiences and grow from them, or is hitting that reset button something that somebody should do?
Well, it's up to the person. Everybody has their own free will, and I highly, if you're happy, then so be it. But if you're not quite living a good life the way you really want it, and you would like it to go to a different level, I just want people to know there's some tools out there now that are crystal clear how to clear up these kinds of issues. Mm-hmm. I didn't even know that this early life imprint was lingering behind the scenes. And ironically, I started seeing it after this event in 2004 when I got triggered really badly. In fact, when the woman said what she said, I felt the reaction like a wave go through my body. And I remember the thoughts. I said, this is way bigger than what she just said. And within 24 hours, I was, shaking, crying, and just really upset. And it didn't stop. It just kept going and going. And I was like, wow, this is intense. And then it just woke me up that there's this whole other memory system in the body. It's called implicit memory, that holds all this information that we're totally unaware of. And the brain later, like let's say 30 years later, somebody says something and it triggers it. The brain thinks it's happening right then and there.
Right.
Because it never got fully processed. And that's the name of the game. And, there's a slideshow I do in one of my presentations. I wish I had it in front of me right now. But, you've got to find a therapist or a coach or a counselor that really understands attachment theory. They need to really understand trauma and how it works in the body. And it's good to know neuroscience, because neuroscience is pretty much validating all of these theories and concepts we've come up with over the last 50, 100 years around, the new psychology of what is trauma, how does it work, why is it, trauma is starting to become so big, the research around trauma, and the reason is because a lot of symptoms that people have go away after they've released the traumas from their early life childhood. They literally go away, like chronic fatigue or fibromyalgia. When people get into these extreme, what we call diseases, it's usually because they've been holding the toxic energy in their body for so long, the body now is starting to manifest a sickness around it, right?
Right.
So these are other clues as to why somebody would want to get help. If you got a great job, you love your work, you love your friends, then don't worry about it. Mm-hmm. Those people probably are not on this call today.
Yeah, probably not. Or they may be saying, well, let's take a look. Maybe I haven't gotten all of this cleaned up. But here's the thing, Ed, is that, okay, so for instance, obviously we're very feeling creatures, and I'm sure pretty much most of the animal kingdom is the same way, but we have a way of intellectualizing it seems.
Right.
The animal kingdom, what's funny about it is, they sort of go through their day, that happens, and then they leave. I mean, a dog is a great example. I mean, here's an animal, you can kind of beat it, and it'll come back to you and still lick the back of your hand and love you, and, hopefully the next day is better. I mean, after a while, it's going to be very cautious if you do it too much. But for the most part, it seems so forgiving, it's like it just sort of forgot that you weren't very nice there just a minute ago, okay,
right.
so to speak. But now with a human, you could say something bad. In fact, right now what pops to mind is one of the Rocky movies where he's sitting in the bar, later in life, and the bartender happens to be this little girl who had actually given him an insult years and years later. Now she's much older bartending. He goes, I remember you, and he says, you said, screw you, creepo. And she says, well, I didn't say that. He says, oh, yeah, you did. Good insults last a long time. And the fact is that what's interesting is that we have the good times, we feel the elation of, that happiness that we felt, we try to hold on to that. And then we also have the bad times too, but for some strange reason, maybe for a lot of us, we don't know how we're supposed to move through and I guess experience that and release and let it go. Why do you think that is? Does it start from, as you were saying, as a baby where we couldn't regulate our nervous system? What is it exactly that we hold on to stuff like that? And as you said, it reappears. If you can't let it go, it finds another way in the body to release itself. It could be cancer, as you said, fibromyalgia. It could be a whole host of things.
Right. So let's go back into looking at how trauma works. Imagine you've heard of the fight, flight, freeze response.
Right.
Okay?
Most people are pretty familiar with that.
So that's a sequence of the safety system. So an initial response, if you look at an animal, like I don't know if you remember Animal Kingdom when we were little, and they would show this picture of a lion chasing an antelope or something.
Right.
So what happens is there's this fight response, which is basically energy that says, I belong here, don't mess with me, my life, I'm going to preserve it. It's the fight response. And if a person pretty quickly decides that fighting is not going to do any good, they're going to run. They're going to try to get away. Okay? And then and this is part of our biology, by the way, this is the lizard brain kicking in 3 to 5 times faster than anything conscious. And so the lizard brain kicks in and it says, get out of here, life is going to be dangerous. Well, when we're tiny, we don't really have that as a choice. We go through we have the fight response, which is a grumpled look on our face and maybe yelling for the first few times. But then if we realize that we're kind of helpless in that area, we go through fight, flight, freeze pretty rapidly. And then let's talk about the freeze response. So the freeze response is actually a dissociative response. That means we no longer are integrating the information that's coming to us. We've literally tried to check out of our bodies because our limbic brain is saying, okay, we're kind of screwed here, so let's just check out, and if we die, it won't be so bad. Okay? Or we'll fake death, and then maybe they'll leave us alone and go away, and we'll preserve our life. That's kind of the wired-in logic. Okay, so the problem with that is if it's not date code and time stamp with the hippocampus, the brain, there's another part of our brain called the amygdala that's like the sentry. It's like, if you ever see those pictures of the castle in Great Britain where those 2 guys are standing out in front of the gate and they stand there all day long just watching and guarding the castle, right?
Right.
So that's the way the amygdala is. It's just constantly looking for anything that could be dangerous. Well, here's the biggest problem with the amygdala. The amygdala generalizes. It doesn't sit there and analyze all of the little pieces of information. So there's a problem with that because it's generalizing. Later in life, when something happens that is sort of like what happened 30 or 40 years ago, like a rejected girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever the situation is. The brain starts responding in a dissociative way, which means now it's no longer capable of pausing and saying, well, wait a minute, in that moment, okay? It's saying, well, we just need to get quiet or leave the room or get away, okay? And that's a problem, okay, because it's generalizing, and here's the key, it's not taking in new information. So that's why, like, mediators are so good, because when two people sit down and they talk to a mediator, the mediator can slow things down and bring in new information so that amygdala and that hippocampus can start reorganizing the information so it literally gets caught up in present reality. Does that make sense?
Right.
Right. So the key, what I teach my clients in my program is if you slow down enough and disengage the frontal cortex, which is trying to rationalize and organize information, if you slow it down and just say, okay, I'm just going to feel the sensations right now and forget about the other images and thoughts of pulling away, or you just name it out loud. You say, oh, I notice right now when you're talking to me, I feel my heart beating faster, my palms are getting sweaty, and I'm actually kind of scared right in this moment.
Mm-hmm.
But that's actually blowing the lid off that unconscious body memory that wants to just go crazy, right?
Mm-hmm.
So let's circle back to dissociation. So if we're dissociated, we don't have the resources to integrate that early life experience. And this becomes the number one problem in almost every case I work with. That dissociation is like when we get spacey, when you start processing something, you might get spacey, or you get tired, or you get very defensive. That's because you're getting really close to the energy that reminds you of that first experience that never got resolved. And the body says, that's too intense, we're going to die, let's do our coping mechanism. So what we want is to recognize these are knee-jerk reactions based on a very limited perspective. Let's say somebody's 40 years old, so 40 years ago when they were born in the first year of life and they didn't get their needs met, and they picked up behaviors of the parents, they think that's how life is. They don't realize that it actually could be different. And so that reaction in the body is actually responding to a very, very old, what we call implicit memory system.
You know, this is all such fascinating stuff when you think about it, because, you know, what better way to discover if there is the stuff in the basement than in a relationship with someone else? Now, again, a lot of people, when they, you know, think of a relationship topic, it's obviously, for a lot of people, a relationship like a love relationship, but then there are those relationships that you have with people you work with. And it's just amazing how life, I guess, continually brings learning opportunities. And obviously that's what you're talking about here today.
Right. Yeah, you know, it does. And I've got a couple of quick stories that bring the point home really clearly. And I didn't even see this until afterwards, but I've been self-employed most of my life. During the 80s, I worked for different companies in the computer business, and then I was self-employed during the 90s. And then around, I think it was 99, I got a job with Portland Community College there for a couple of years, and then Intel for a couple of years. And what was interesting was Intel was the first job I actually had where I was around people in the office. Other jobs I'd done out in the field, and so I was independent. Well, when you're in an office with people, it activates all the memories of your family dynamic, okay? And then I had a job later at Providence Hospital up in Everett, Washington, and it was the same thing. It was like all of my memories from my family dynamic started revealing themselves. Well, what's interesting is the job at Intel, even though I got laid off, it was a week after my birthday.
Mm-hmm.
When I lost the job at Providence, it was a week after my birthday.
Wow.
when I had the traumatic event in 2004 with the lady friend that I've been dating, it was literally almost 9 months to the day, a week after my birthday, is when she said we're going to terminate. We need to talk about terminating this relationship. Mm-hmm. No warning, no like conversation that led up to it. It was just, we're done. I'm like, what? Mm-hmm. So what's beautiful about this is I could have gone the other direction and made everybody wrong for those, losing those jobs or that, but there's actually something really remarkable about what we attract into our lives and how we sequence things that repeat traumas. Okay, now I could see, 1 or 2 times that's just a coincidence, but when it's 3 times, I don't see it as a coincidence anymore. In fact, since then, there's been so many smaller things that I watch and look at, and I ask myself the question, how is this familiar to me, that it becomes so obvious now when I ask myself that question, when I'm repeating something or playing out something, it's just, it's just really obvious to me that I'm reenacting something that's trying to finish itself.
That's really an interesting point for our listeners to have here, Ed. And there was a time, that I myself was dating quite frequently some years ago. And I noticed for me that I was always seemingly in a position to be a rescuer.
Yeah.
Sort of like, well, this girl here, we're in relationship, but you could sense that I was rescuing, and there was actually an ex that said that, well, you like to come in, as the knight in shining armor and rescue. And as you were just describing this, I thought about that, over the years, and I was like, well, yeah, I guess you're right, and well, you rescue, and then soon enough, they're on the horse, they're kind of riding with you for a little bit, you set them down, they start walking, and what they inevitably would do is just walk away from you. And that was the end of that, and you would feel a little hurt, like, well, wait a minute, what's going on here? But I kind of realized that pattern is a possibility from, I remember when I was with my aunt taking my mother to the hospital, and she was in a lot of pain, and she, dropped my mother off, and here, she was slowly walking toward the hospital doors in a lot of pain, and I just sat there wanting to get out and be with her, to walk in the hospital with her. I don't know if that's what triggered all these kinds of things, such as getting into what seemed to be rescuing relationships, but I could see what you're saying, how that would make a lot of sense because of something like that possibly.
Right. Well, I could make a couple of comments about that. I think it's natural. If you study emotional intelligence, one of the cornerstones of emotional intelligence is compassion, and knowing when compassion is the right thing to engage in. In fact, I was just writing one of my modules for my new Getting Relationship Right program, and in there I was talking about compassion and the ones that people think are compassion, but they're really trying to. So let me give you an example. It'll kind of illustrate the point. So if I see somebody that's struggling with some decision they're making, now I can reach out and say, well, I got the answer. Here it is. What I really have to do is look at my intention behind why I'm saying what I'm saying, and that intention will guide us as to whether or not we're rescuing somebody because we want to feel better, because we're uncomfortable with their pain and their suffering, which is, I believe, is part of our hardwiring. It's built into our social system so we don't, kill each other or whatever, even though it seems contradictory at times. But what I want you to get is, if we look at our intention about why we're doing what we're doing, we start seeing that we actually do people a disservice when we don't intervene or provide support at the right times. Mm-hmm. Our country has become addicted to like attorneys and medicine and, give me a quick fix, doc. That's all I care about. I'm in pain, right? Mm-hmm. We've literally built that into our society, and it's got major ramifications. Okay, staying on food stamps and public support and these kinds of things, those don't empower the part of us that is very resilient and very capable of doing magic. And so that's why I love coaching, because coaching, the fundamental premise under coaching is to help people to find their own resources so they believe in themselves.
Right.
And I believe that the imprint, the early life imprint, is what dictates whether or not somebody really believes in themselves or not. I think self-esteem is wrapped around these first few years of life. And when people have really good self-esteem, they don't attract a lot of rescuers. They attract good relationships, but they don't require, unconsciously, they don't require people to show up and give them answers, because that is actually recreating the dynamic of, well, they know more than I do, or I'm not quite good enough, or, maybe they'll finally come to the rescue because my diapers never got changed at 2 weeks old. whatever the unconscious thing that's driving it, we don't want to feed that. We don't want to contribute to that. But instead, we want to hold a really nice, sweet space for somebody and say, I'm wondering what you could do right now instead of me doing it, giving you the answer. And especially, I'll give you a quick example. I was in a conversation at a table the other day at a brunch, and I was sharing a story about something I'm learning, and this lady says, well, this lady that we know, she does it way better than that, and she has a different way. And she said it initially with a little gruff tone, and then I kept going, and then she interrupted again. Well, this time, instead of going, let me finish my story, I had this moment where I said, this woman is angry, and she really needs to share something right now. So I paused.
You mean you didn't just call the security over and have her hauled out?
No. No, I just looked at her and I said, well, tell me more about this lady you're talking about. What's her name? And I pulled out my little phone, my little iPhone, and I started typing her name in, and then she just calmed right down like it was no one's business. And I said, and so you really like her because of this, this, and this. And she said, yeah, she's like amazing. And her face softened. She relaxed, and then when it was done, I turned towards everybody again, and I finished my story. and it was beautiful because I didn't get hooked into her drama of interrupting me and being upset and creating some tension there, and she was able to finally get heard, even though her way of going about it was pretty unconscious and pretty extreme, which, by the way, was the second time she had done it. But it was really powerful for me because I realized in that moment I was not attached to my story. Right? And that's the key, is like if I would have been telling that story because I wanted to feel heard and I thought I needed, to show up and, I'm really smart and I need to share this with everybody so they'll like me, that wasn't what was going on. I was sharing just from a story, and that this is life, and it just felt like a good thing to share with the group. So that was very powerful for me because I can't count the number of times that I had, shared in my lifetime and then felt this big letdown because, people didn't get up and dance and tell me I was such a great guy.
And that's what's so interesting, too, is how often life can present these things to you. And I know there's a story that I have shared off and on in the radio program where at night in the kitchen when I go to cook, which I enjoy doing because it's a wonderful way to move into the creative moment. It relieves a tremendous amount of stress. It's just an enjoyable thing to do. And even when I find myself feeling tired, I just don't feel like going through the process of preparing dinner. I'll do it because I know once I get started, I'll just start feeling better after a while. Nice. It's just a great thing. Everybody should cook. Anyway, but what was funny was for a while I found myself having these accidents in the kitchen. Not necessarily like cutting my finger or anything like that, but accidents. I might spill something, try to take a shortcut to where I would have to inevitably clean up a mess, or I'd just do something, as I'd say to myself, that was stupid. And at first I found myself kind of getting upset. Doggone it, there's that spill. I've got to clean that up. After a while, I started getting intrigued with the fact that inevitably an accident's going to happen. And it's going to happen spontaneously in a way that I can't really possibly expect or anticipate. And I started looking forward to these things, and I started laughing about them when they did happen. I couldn't have expected that would happen there, and it would happen, and I would go, there it is finally, and I would laugh. But then what I began to notice was I started having these things happen less and less and less, to the point where they weren't ever happening hardly ever at all. And I found that was really intriguing, but it's much like what you were describing here, I would think, with this woman who jumps in. I think that would be one of the biggest fears a person might feel in a seminar when they have a body of work such as you do. You're presenting it to an audience, and you're going in there, and I'm sure the night before, or even the week before, as you have this planned, is that people are going to jump on board. They're going to go, wow, this is the greatest thing since sliced bread. You've saved my life. And we believe this, and we hope for that when that happens, when you do the presentation. And then inevitably somebody happens to be in that group, or there could be a couple of people that jump on board once the one who has the courage to speak up does, and basically rains on your parade. And now you take the position to finally say, well, let's just hear what this person has to say. How do you think the outcomes start to become after that?
Well, say more about that, the outcome after that, like how they respond?
Well, no, the point, like, for instance, my story, how I started anticipating these things and, and kind of laughing about it, like, hey, great, this happened. So, like, in your circumstance, you have this seminar. You mentioned how this lady, sort of jumped in and was gruff and saying, well, I know somebody better. And instead of taking the position, look, lady, here's your money back, get the hell out of here, you said, well, let's hear what she has to say. It would seem like after a while you might possibly not experience that too much anymore.
Right. Well, yeah, you're pointing to something really important, which is there's a couple things.
I know I'm kind of dancing around it, but it was the best way I could bring it in.
Yeah, no, that's okay. In your story of being in the kitchen, what I hear in your story is you developed an awareness of your experience.
Mm-hmm.
And awareness is the what I want to say, the holy grail of healing anything. Because if we can stop and we can see what we're actually doing, it can unplug the dynamic. So your process of watching yourself was probably eventually like in slow motion, and you were getting, the more we were aware, the more present we become. Okay? And when we're present, we're unhooking these stories, these unconscious dynamics that start playing out when we get triggered, because we're really present and we can make choices moment by moment. And that's a very healthy, integrated mind when you're able to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So going now to the lady in the workshop that's upset, or the guy that's upset and wants to challenge the speaker, if a speaker is secure about their work and they feel good about themselves, first of all, there's a very small chance they'll even attract that kind of person. But if that kind of person shows up, most of the time I see it as a manifestation of something that's still trying to finish themselves in whoever has a reaction. So if I'm like in this case, I was sitting at a brunch table and the lady interrupted twice, and then I realized that she wasn't going to go away, that she was upset. It wasn't about me. I was very clear that it wasn't about me. And so it gave me a distance, a resilience, if you want to use that word. It gave me a distance to be able to say, actually what I did was I engaged compassion, which is a high emotional intelligence skill to use in that moment. So I was able to, and by the way, this isn't every time. This was a magical moment that I experienced a few weeks ago. So I just want to be clear that not everybody thinks I'm like this guru walking around, because that isn't true. But in this moment, I felt really good because I could see in the moment what was happening, and I just stopped and I slowed down. And so my awareness was one of, I'm not attached to my story, which means I had a pretty clear intention behind telling the story. Mm-hmm. Whereas if my intention was to get attention, I might have been upset because she's messing up my deal to get attention.
Right.
But I didn't have that intention. I had the intention of sharing something about myself in a very, kind, loving, communicative, socializing way that was contributing to a deeper connection amongst the people at the table. Well, she was feeling insecure for whatever reason, and it manifested itself through her challenging me, and I didn't take the challenge. I was using like emotional Aikido. I just turned to her and said, well, tell me more, what's going on here? And my tone and my body language was one of, hey, it's okay. If you can imagine a baby crying and they're not getting it their way, it was like I was able to reach out and say, hey, I'm here for you. Don't worry anymore. You don't have to cry anymore. It's that equivalent of that memory. And so what I did was actually probably extremely healing for her, and whether or not she could even see her pattern of behavior, I have no idea. And in fact, over a 3 or 4 month period, I'd been around her twice at different tables, and both times she had a kind of a very aggressive response to something that I said. Mm-hmm. So I was already kind of queued up for her energy from a previous experience, and I had kind of in my mind said, what do I want to do if that kind of person shows up again? And that's when I kind of dialogued with myself around, well, what was my original intention? If I'm interrupting somebody because I'm trying to get a word in so we have a discussion amongst all of us, or am I just sitting there listening to somebody that's a talking head and doesn't want anybody else to share because she wants attention, then people are going to get aggravated and annoyed because this person has an intention that says, you need to listen to me because I've got the table right now, right?
Right.
Sometimes that's good. I mean, people need to finish what they're saying, but when it goes on and on and on, we start looking around going, okay, is this person ever going to take a breath? Right?
All the oxygen over here, please.
Right. And our society, just says, don't interrupt the person because it's rude or it's not right, whatever, and I think that's part of the mistake. Mm-hmm. Somebody at some point needs to say, I'm noticing I'm starting to get distracted, and I'm wondering if we can have a dialogue amongst all of us instead of a one-sided conversation here. And that's a very powerful way to shift a social norm that is probably dysfunctional in any of those kind of moments.
For those of you just tuning in, we're talking with Mr. Ed Ferrigan. You can visit him at the website gettingrelationshipright.com, and I'm sure you can also find that on Facebook, which is at Facebook, Ed Ferrigan, Getting Relationship Right as well. Now, Ed, I was
go to facebook.com/Getting Relationship Right and post any comments or questions, and then if we want, we can answer some of those questions in our last few minutes here.
Certainly will do that. Now, here was something that you had mentioned earlier that we tend to, I guess, surrender or hand over our ability to solve problems or face challenges. We're always looking outside of ourselves for, and proof behind the pudding is this: if you go to the YouTube channel, you will find, of course, not just videos, millions of them, but the predominantly successful videos that are on YouTube, the ones that tend to get the most hits on average as a genre, are YouTube videos showing people how to do something. Now, for the most part, that's a pretty good thing. It's always good to go if you're going to learn something you haven't done before from someone, or maybe even a group of people. For instance, if you're making a lasagna, for instance, it's good to go that route to get the basics and to get started. But there are sometimes people will get that first instruction and then they'll hold themselves rigid to it, and they sort of deny themselves of that creativity. What do you think has happened in our society that we get to a point that we just can no longer trust ourselves in our own growth to a point that, and I'm sure maybe you've experienced this, whether personally or with other people, that they sort of become addicted to the process of being coached or asking the question, but that sounds good, but I want the best of the right thing to do.
Right.
What's going on there, do you think?
I don't have a clear answer as to the the consequences of thinking you have to always go somewhere for an answer.
Right.
But I can say that, one, it's a great resource. If you think of our nervous system loves resources that calm it down, right?
I see. So it is about kind of calming anxiety, in other words.
Think of anything in life. This was an aha moment for me. Anything in life is going to either activate us or calm us down.
Right.
Okay. So you crack a joke, I get activated, and I start laughing, and then that dissipates. Right. It's like a bell curve, and in that bell curve, we have a level of competency. Okay, so if you move towards the top of that bell curve, there's a level of, I call it the zone of competency, where we're really excited about something and we're challenged. We've got a little bit of challenge to that something we're excited about. Like right now, I'm learning how to create online information products, exactly what you're talking about with YouTube, right? And I'm learning how do you create a product that actually excites people, gets them motivated, provides just enough information that, makes it a high value, and then encourages them to take action to do something with it. Because the brain, I just had a conversation with one of my clients yesterday, the brain will not change until we do something different than what we've been doing.
Right.
Goes back to that amygdala has a certain generalization it makes, and until it gets a new experience that brings in new information, it's going to keep assuming the same thing over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So when we look at people that become addicted to these videos, the question I have is, is the video encouraging them to go out and take action? Because if you look at a little kid when they're growing up, one of the developmental stages is to build their confidence so they feel resourced to go out into the world and do something good or do something that they can make a living and feel good about it. So part of that developmental process means how do we raise kids in such a way that they feel good about themselves, because that sense of well-being gives them the encouragement to go out. If you look at the primitive brain, when we were first on the planet in Africa, if we walked outside, we'd get eaten by a lion, right?
Right.
So the equivalent of that is if I go out into the world and I leave home, the lions are out there and they're going to eat me if I don't have a really high level of intelligence or I have some kind of specialty that makes me unique and I can do this job really well. Right? That's the equivalent. So our brains are wanting to be resourced. We're wanting to learn information. We're wanting to build our confidence in such a way that we can go out and meet life challenges. Mm-hmm. So I think that's an important piece, that these YouTube videos, it's great because I finally started, wanting to learn an instrument after so many years. I'd always dinked around with guitar, but I wanted to learn the harmonica. So I got on YouTube and I started listening to harmonica, videos, and I'm thinking, these guys don't know how to teach. So, they might be good at the harmonica, but they don't know how to break it down into small enough chunks for a beginner like me. So I've searched high and low for good quality instructors, and they're very hard to find.
Sure they are.
If someday I get good, that's going to be a new information product I'm going to produce because they're lousy at teaching it.
Right. It's pretty fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah. So learning is a resource. I guess that's the thing I want to take home to people, is learning is a resource for us, and we can find that in multiple places.
And there's no doubt, Ed, I'm sure, because of the many people that you have worked with and the experiences that you have had, is that life always brings us learning opportunities for us to grow, and you have to ask yourself, at what point do we finally feel we've grown enough? And I remember years ago as I first began to study, for instance, Buddhism, and the gauntlet was basically thrown down that says you will not become an enlightened being until all sentient beings are enlightened themselves. When that happens, when we're all enlightened, then I guess we go to that next level. And when you think of humanity in and of as whole, that could take centuries of lifetimes before that happens.
Right.
So it's kind of a way of saying don't get too high on your horse because you're not there yet until everybody else is there with you.
Right. There's a rule of thumb I have that I think will be helpful for the audience today, and that is I heard it from Gay Hendricks many years ago, and he said that the amount of pain we experience is equal to the amount of resistance we have to what is.
Ah.
So when you really play with that, you start realizing that moment by moment is just what it is, and it's the meaning we make out of it through our sensory perceptions and our perspective that gives it the power that it has.
Mm-hmm.
So in any given moment, any given moment, we have the power to change our perspective and to change and to see things in a different way. So, what that does is it's a brilliant statement. I actually think it came from Krishnamurti. I could be wrong, but
mm-hmm.
That what it does is it backs us into. In fact, Jay Krishnamurti, somebody asked him one time. They said, "Do we need therapists and coaches?" And he said, "Well, maybe." He says, "But truthfully, just look at the results you're getting, and that'll tell you what you're doing."
Right.
So, the mistake we all make, not all of this all the time, but quite often is, I think I've talked about this in previous shows, is there's a thing called the responsibility triangle. And if people were to draw a triangle on a piece of paper, and at the top of it put blamer or persecutor, and on the bottom left you put victim, and on the bottom right you put rescuer. And what you want to remember is that these are fear-based strategies. So write that in the middle of that triangle, fear-based strategies. And so what happens is when fear kicks in and we're not conscious, we lose our awareness, we will 98% of the time move into one of these three dynamics. And so oftentimes we can have one foot in blame and one foot in victim. What I believe is actually happening is we're projecting an early life memory that never got completed into that moment.
Ah.
When we're little, big people are our gods, right? They're like our universe. They know all the answers, so they must be right, and yet our system is going bonkers because it knows something's not right and it doesn't feel safe. So we get this sense of helplessness, disempowerment when we're tiny, and then unconsciously it plays out because we migrate towards bosses that are bullies, or they don't see our uniqueness, they don't help coach us to greatness in our jobs or whatever, and even our friends will contribute to us staying stuck in that little way of thinking that contributes to that early life imprint that I'm not good enough, or somehow I've got to do something different than what I'm already doing. So if we use that triangle as a way to measure, what I teach people is how do you get off the triangle once you notice you're on it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And then that gives us our power back instantly. So if let's say, for example, I'm on the triangle and I'm upset, I want to be right, and I can say, okay, right now I'm really arguing to be right. And to get off the triangle, what you want to do is say, okay, I just want to acknowledge right now I have a bigger commitment to being right, and step off the triangle. I literally physically put down 3 pieces of paper and have people stand on it. And I recommend this for couples, and then step off the triangle and say, okay, here's what's really true is I've got a real attitude and a position about being right now, and I want to just drop that for a moment. And if you could repeat what you said, let me move into a space of trying to understand more clearly what it is that you believe, and then I'll put what I believe, and then we can both kind of see both perspectives and not make each other wrong. If people
maybe even
that,
come to a different belief altogether that you both like that hybrids itself.
Well, that's exactly what ends up happening. And there's been a lot of books on dialogue that have been written, and that's what happens in dialogue. When you lay things out on the table without trying to convince anybody of anything, you say, well, here's what I'm thinking, what are you thinking? And then you put that down. Pretty soon the ego loses its power, and actually I shouldn't say it loses its power, it gets directed in a healthy way, okay? And then we can say, hey, it's really neat that I can respect you and you can respect me, and that's a huge repair for most people in their nervous system, because the nervous system says, now it has information that says, wow, look at what's possible.
It's amazing just how vulnerable we can feel, especially when it comes time to a relationship with someone else, and it not just necessarily a love relationship as couples, but also work relationships, friendships, all of it. And you know, it's just there was a guest I had on the show, and this was some time ago, and he said his goal was really to help people to start getting in the habit to look into themselves. And as I thought about that, and I started doing more of that, that inner talk that you have in situations and the like, you begin to just start stepping in the world moment by moment as the moment is, and you literally start becoming fascinated about what's going on,
right.
Rather than
You're not attached.
What's that? Exactly. And it's not a non-attachment as far as indifference. It's that you just sort of welcome and say, how will I handle myself in this situation now? And it really just becomes intriguing.
Right. I call it fireworks.
Yeah. I
see,
figured you would.
You see the fireworks, but you're not attached to anybody's stories, or
right.
You're not taking it personally. You're just kind of, there's more of a flow. That goes back to that saying, you know, the amount of pain we experience is equal to the amount of resistance we have in any given moment.
Mm-hmm.
So if there's no resistance, then there's more ease and flow in the nervous system, right?
And would you agree that life actually starts getting a lot easier? Even the rough stuff gets easier to handle. The solutions get a lot easier.
That's actually the key, because once we achieve that, people flock to us because they can sense there's something very unique and loving about us
mm-hmm.
when we're in that space, and they want that. People are dying for that these days. So, you know, there's tons of books out there on relationships, and if they're not dealing with this implicit memory, these unconscious dynamics, then they're missing the whole boat. And you know, you want to understand that once these unconscious dynamics are dealt with, and you can see it in slow motion, what's unfolding, it shifts. Everything changes.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's a matter of just choice. It's not a matter of, you know, this drama or this drama or this drama. It's about, oh, here's what I'm looking for, and here's what it looks like, and here's what I want. And within days or hours, it can show up,
mm-hmm.
literally.
Always a fascinating topic, and always a wonderful pleasure to have you here on the Beyond 50 radio program. Ed, if you could, give out your website again and how people can find out more about what you have available to offer, because as we're just now saying, it's really amazing how much easier life truly gets when you can kind of snap yourself and rebound to be right into what's happening right now. You just realize, boy, you've got a multitude of choices in pretty much any circumstance.
Yeah, right.
Mm-hmm.
So let me give you two little gifts here for being on the program today, and I want to thank you, Dan, as well for inviting me in. The first one is if you go to gettingrelationshipright.com, there'll be a free 5-week quick start audio course on getting relationship right. You can join that, and you'll get 5 weeks worth of free audio. It's really an awesome program I put together, and it continues to grow. And then for the next 24 hours, anybody that wants to pursue my program, you can go to gettingrelationshipright.com/program.html. So that's gettingrelationshipright.com/program.html. And there'll be a full description there of what that whole program is about. For those of you who know you're really wanting to get your life together in relationship form, this is a really good program that's a super high value. So thanks, Dan. I appreciate the time. It's been wonderful chatting with you again. It's been a couple of years, and I've really enjoyed it today.
Well, Ed Ferrigan, again, thank you for joining us here on the program. Again, your website is gettingrelationshipright.com, correct?
Yep.
Very good. Ed, again, thank you for joining us.
Okay.
Well, I encourage you to...
Yeah.
You bet. Encourage you, the listeners out there, to be sure to visit us. Our website is beyond50radio.com. That's the number 50. We'll also have a link up there for Ed Ferrigan as well. Also be sure to visit us at our blog. That's at radio.com/blog, and that's where we also archive this show so you can listen at your convenience and share with others as well. We encourage you to do that. We thank you again for tuning in. This is the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis, and remember, live your day past halfway.